an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering King of Scars, chapters 36, 37, 38, and 39. Nikolai, Isaac, Nina, and Zoya. In these chapters, it turns out that the monk isn't the monk anymore. Also, my dear sweet Isaac is no more, and I hate it. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Joanna for commissioning this episode. So, first of all, for some reason, it's been a while since I covered this book. I thought that I had 2 more episodes worth of material, but it was not. And so this means that the next episode I'm going to be starting the second book. And I'm pretty stoked about that, actually. And let me check and see, because I feel like the next episode is going to be coming up shortly. But let's see. Oh, yeah. Tuesday next week. Sweet. So that's always fun. I'd love to be able to start the next book in a series I'm covering like right away. But yeah, this, like, I'm really glad. I think if I remember correctly, last episode I was sort of torn about breaking it up at all because it felt like it might not quite be enough to justify 2 whole separate episodes. I'm very glad I did that now, because the way that this ends and how unexpectedly it all goes is, there's just so much to talk about here. So we start off with Nikolai, and we are with him right after everything that goes down with Zoya saving him. And it opens with the thornwood was bleeding. The sap that flowed from its trunks was no longer gold, but red, as if with Elizaveta's death it had died too. Nikolai pulled himself free, and the blood from his hands and legs dripped onto the sand. His chest throbbed, and yet the only sign that he'd driven a spike through it was a star-shaped scar. And this was when I started to wonder, because there was like a sense that maybe the darkness in him had been defeated somehow. Not so. And I shouldn't have expected it to be. I know that there's another book after this that is, to do with Nikolai. So I should have seen it coming, that this struggle was going to probably be the focus of both books. But I just did. I just kind of thought, So he goes over to Zoya. She lay on a wilted bed of thorn trees and red quince blossoms, her hair splayed around her face. Before her, a dark pile of dead bees was heaped amid the branches. And then he sees that Sancta Elizaveta is dead and is just kind of like, wait, so what's going to happen to this weird fold area? And I love this. He is like, hey, are you okay? And she says she is. And he's like, well, are you sure? And she says, which one of us gets to kill the monk? To which he's like, okay, you're fine. So I had forgotten, too, that she buried Yuri in the sand. So he is just sitting there with his head sticking out, because she buried him up to his neck. And Nikolai says, I hate to say it, but we're going to have to let him live. I was like, we are? I need all the information we can garner on the cult of the Starless and how the saints brought us here. I think it may have been Elizaveta who unlocked my chains the night I got free from the palace. She said their power could extend beyond the fold, but only where the people's faith was strongest. Yuri was at the palace that night. Maybe Elizaveta used him to send her vines or insects past my guards. I really don't like this. we've got the death of every one of those saints at this point, so that's sort of reassuring. But it's, compared to the fact that the Darkling appears to be pretty much back, I don't know that it's actually better. But yeah, so Zoya is just like, oh, really? The guy that you invited to stay at the house wound up being super dangerous? So yeah, it's a weird moment. They don't say here, as they look at the monk, that his face has changed. There's no mention of it. And I'm unsure whether that's because they haven't noticed, whether it's because that is something that like gradually happens later, and maybe it's mentioned, but I just read these chapters and I don't remember it. But that was the thing that sort of caught me off guard, was when it's revealed who he looks like now and what happened. I was sort of like, why didn't we see any reaction to that at the time? And I still don't really understand, because that cuts off like from there. It ends with like this little section. She asked, "Are you free?" And he says, "As free as I'll ever be." He didn't have the heart to tell her. He could still feel the monster somewhere inside him, weakened, licking its wounds, but waiting for the opportunity to rise again. So the two of them are trudging back, and there's this like moment where he's getting healed by this kid, a young Grisha, and he's like, "I'm really sorry, this is going to leave a scar." And Nikolai's like, "Well, is it a roguish scar?" And Zoya tells this kid, "I'm expecting you to keep all of this to yourself, because this is like basically everything that we have done here. All of this has been under the cover, and they don't know this yet, but this has been all under the cover while the alleged king is off handling some shit somewhere else. It's nobody's business, especially considering what we find out has happened to the monk." So it's a weird moment. She trained her gaze hard on the boy and said, "I will consider it treason. That is a hanging offense." He stumbled backward through the doorway. "Yes, Commander. Of course, Commander." And she's kind of like, why is he so jumpy? They seem a lot softer these days. But Nikolai saw that her eyes flashed silver and her pupils had turned to slits. And he realizes that somehow Zoya has part of the dragon in her now. And he's just kind of like, what exactly had she done to get them free? And I am super curious about this now, because I assumed the connection that she had was going to be purely through the amplifiers around her wrists. This reflection of the animal she bonded with is not something that we saw with Alina, you know? So there is clearly more that happened here than what we have ever seen before. And I know that the whole thing with the Saints was that they could change shape. So maybe that's supposed to be sort of what's going on here, is that because she has unlocked more of her abilities as a Grisha, she's able to do what they did, and she just hasn't actually fully manifested it yet. But that'll be very interesting, and also probably a little bit scary, because, I mean, we're dealing with something very different here. And Zoya, there's a part of me that feels like she will enjoy that power, because Zoya likes power, and there's nothing wrong with that. But I wonder if it's going to be, I don't know. I just don't know if there will be any downsides to it. Maybe she won't completely have control of it, because it happens here unintentionally and she doesn't realize it's happened, you know? So Yuri sat silent and shivering in his bindings, his hood pulled low over his face. I am assuming that the hood is pulled low because he has transformed. And maybe the whole thing with, like, neither of them mentioning it is it might purely be because the author wanted it to be a surprise at the end, but it just feels incredible to me that we don't even get any dialogue about, like, that's alluding to it. Like, when they go and pick him up and she's like, which one of us gets to kill him? Like, any mention of, I can't believe, like, we have to do this all over again. Or, wait, is that my imagination? And the other one being like, no, I see it also. Anything to sort of indicate that they notice something's wrong, but there's nothing. And I feel like that just doesn't seem in character. It's fine. It's not like a big deal, but you know what I mean? So Nikolai is walking through these towns disguised, and he's looking for any signs that people are upset over his disappearance. And he doesn't see any. And he's just like, wait, so do people, like, not give him a shit about me? Is that what's going on? And eventually he starts to be like, maybe they have just been able to sort of, like, cover it up. Maybe they kept it secret. So they get to the palace, and we have this, like, moment of them realizing, oh my God, they decided to have the huge gathering after all. It hadn't occurred to them that this would still have been carried out. And Nikolai eventually realizes that they followed his plan, that he, like, and there's a part of him that is sort of gratified that they listened to him and that it did apparently work really well. But also the fact that he is apparently a little replaceable bothers him a little bit. But before he, like, quite realizes that's what's happening, he spots Isaac and has a moment of completely, like, losing his sense of identity and wondering if something happened. Like, he says, what if I'm not Nikolai anymore? What if he's just the monster? What if he was still caught in the Twilight Fold and this was all a dream? And it's the kind of thing where this works really well here for me. There are times where I have had, you know, some, like, properties I'm covering where a person is stopping and going, oh my God, is this even real? And sometimes it can feel really like, yeah, it's real. Can you please move on? Can we get this going here? It can just feel sort of like a delaying tactic that isn't genuine. But considering everything that they have been through and the warping of reality they've experienced, this moment is just tragic. You know, him genuinely wondering, is he lost? Is he outside himself? You know, I hate that for him. So he sees, finally, this is the reason why nobody is flipping out and that Genya has tailored him. And then he says, a lesser man might have found it humbling, and yet his mind couldn't help but spool out the possibilities. He could have this actor sit through state dinners and the openings of orphanages and concert halls. Nikolai could be in two places at once. But what was his new twin doing away from the other guests? So this is amazing. I have often said how great it would be to clone myself and be able to, like, accomplish twice as much. You know, everybody has that sort of fantasy at one time or another, I think. But Nikolai is taking it for granted that this guy is going to just, like, be cool with that and just stay as Nikolai's twin. And while he would, because we know that Isaac is willing to do what needs doing because he's a good soldier, it does feel rough that Nikolai would be like, okay, I am back now, but you're not getting out of this. You know, ugh, that sucks. So he's, like, looking at this, wondering what's going on. And he sees that the two of them, the version of himself and the princess, are together without chaperones. And Nikolai is watching this guy's body language and is like, wait a second, is he about to, like, say it? He looks like he's about to make a declaration of love. And then they go up to one another. He holds her in his arms. Her face is tilted up. And Nikolai sees that she has a knife in her hands. And I will tell you guys what. I fully expected him to save Isaac. Fully expected. I don't know if I'm alone in that. But I expected that what we were going to get here when we go to Isaac's POV was the moment of confusion where Isaac sees that that the king has returned, and the realization that this girl isn't who he thought. And we don't get that. It's not, that would be too tidy and easy in its way. And he has really fallen for this girl. And it turns out she has fallen for him. I had wondered whether or not she was actually the princess. And it turns out in the end that she is not. I was right about that. But I wasn't entirely sure why it wouldn't be the princess. It didn't occur to me that she would be an instrument of assassination. It never entered my mind that she was going to be the danger. I don't remember, honestly, if I said anything to that effect in previous episodes, but I don't think I did. I don't think I sensed this at all. So she steps towards him, and there's a moment where he sort of backs away because he's still trying to be like, keep the propriety between the two of them. And then he realizes that she's a little hurt by it. And she says, "Did I misunderstand?" And he says, "No, but there's something I need to tell you." And he can't tell her the truth. So what he says is, "What is it you like about me?" And I really love this. She asks, "Is this a test, or does your pride just need stroking?" And he says, "My pride is always in need of tender attention." Then he cursed beneath his breath. That was Nikolai talking, and he did not want to be Nikolai tonight. I loved that moment. As soon as he says, "My pride is always in need of tender attention," I went, wow, that was so Nikolai right there. And I love the fact that Nikolai's voice is distinctive enough that I can tell that's what's going on in a moment, And I like that he knows that he wants to be himself here. That's important to him right now, And as he then says, "You know what? I'm going to tell you what I like about you. Your nerve, your way with a practice sword, that you always say what you mean, the way you look when you tell stories of your house by the lake." She tilted her head, and for a moment an expression of such sadness flashed across her face. And when he asks what it is, she says, "I wish this moment could last." But because we know that she has a knife, we know that this is all, she doesn't want to do this. She's gonna, but she isn't happy about it. She doesn't feel like, she's not cold-blooded. This wasn't an act for her. She's genuinely broken up over the fact that this dude seems like a good person. And he starts wondering about whether or not this could ever, could this fall apart? If he chose her to marry, would they allow him to keep this arrangement? What if Isaac is replaced by Nikolai again? Would he just have to watch Nikolai marry the girl? And would Ari ever realize the man she wed was not the man who had stood here in this conservatory on this night with his heart full of longing? And this is when he says, "Could you love me if I was not a king?" And he has her in his arms. "I could," she said, and he didn't understand why her eyes were suddenly full of tears. "I know I could." "What's wrong?" "Nothing at all," she whispered. He felt a jolt as if she'd shoved him and looked down. Something was sticking out of his chest. "Why?" "For my country," she said as she wept. "For my brother. For my queen." "You don't understand," he tried to say. A laugh emerged from his lips, but it sounded wrong, like a bubble popping. "Forgive me," she said, and yanked the dagger from his body. Pain flooded through him as he felt the warm gush of blood from his wounds. She pressed a soft kiss to his lips. "My only comfort is that you never could have been mine, but know that I would gladly have been yours." Airy, he groaned as the world began to go dark. Not airy. Everyone mourns the first blossom, she recited softly. Who will weep for the rest that fall? Isaac watched helpless as she grasped the dagger and drove the blade into her own heart. Listen. That is brutal. And she doesn't die. This was just so unexpected. I never thought that the assassination attempt would be followed up by a suicide. I don't know if that was actually the plan. That's what's sort of unclear to me, is like, did she just decide to kill herself because she couldn't live with herself after having done this and just decided, you know what are they going to do to me? I'll be dead. And decided that she was just going to, take care of it right now. Or was it supposed to be like taken as somebody came upon the both of them? Because I think at one point Genya is like, I think it's Nikolai who says it was the shoe girl, and she's like, what? It couldn't have been. She's injured too. It doesn't occur to her that the girl did it to herself. And I can't tell, of course, based on like the way this is written, we don't get a full picture of the way their bodies are found. So I'm imagining them being discovered and this girl's hands still being like wrapped around the hilt of the knife, but it doesn't seem like that's the case. Or if it were, it could be interpreted perhaps as she went to like pull the dagger out, but she just didn't have the strength to do it, kind of thing, So it may have been supposed to, they say at one point that it's a Fjerdan knife, and the shoe were evidently going to frame the Fjerdans for this. But would it have been the shoe like trying to team up with Nikolai, I guess, against the Fjerdans? I am afraid that I have kind of lost track of the way that politics works here and what the shoe are really after, But yeah, this is just so, what I find tragic about it is that she is going to find out that he isn't who she thought, and is going to realize that she just killed some random guy who she may have actually impossibly been able to have a relationship with after all. Don't know if that's really could have, but it seems like it could have been more possible. But at least she will have the truth. Poor Isaac died without knowing any of the truth. And that's part of what kills me. He doesn't understand that I fell in love with this princess and she fell in love with me. And he thinks that it was, he just thinks it was a whole other situation, And I wish so much that there could have been a moment where she says not airy, but I don't know if he was even conscious enough to hear and understand by the time he died. And I know it doesn't actually make a difference, but there is something so final about him dying without like getting that clear. Do you know what I mean? So then we go to Nina, and the chapter before this past, the Nikolai chapter, we had been with Nina as she was like going over everything with Hannah and talking to her about the fact that, yeah, she used Hannah and she, didn't want to be in that position, but she's not sorry because she will do what needs to be done. And she tells Hannah that we can stop all of these guys if you will help me out. And Hannah finally seems to like kind of come around, because there's been a few moments where it seemed unclear whether Hannah was going to be able to face the reality of who her father is and what's going on in her country, which is just so understandable. I mean, Hannah would be far from the first person to be like, you know what, I think I'm just going to close my eyes to these atrocities and convince myself that this was a lone outlier and not a systematic annihilation / eugenics program. We're going to have a genocide, but we're also going to have eugenics for breeding. So, like, what do you call a combination genocide and breeding program where it's like, yeah, no, we want some of these people to still be alive, but only under strictly controlled circumstances? I feel like there has to be a word for that. I don't know what it is, and I'm probably glad I don't. But so Nina is figuring out what she is going to wear, and she is still playing the role of a Fjerdan widow. So she isn't wearing any jewelry or anything. And I love this moment. Nina smiled at the girl in the mirror, the expression sweet and guileless. She smoothed her flaxen hair into a tidy braided crown that would have made the well-mother proud, and found her way to the solarium. The great glass windows were ringed with frost, and through them she could see the ice moat, and beyond it the glittering spires of the white island. The ice court was as dazzling as she remembered, and I was like, oh, word? We are here now? I didn't expect us to jump ahead so far. She is in the midst of like a full-on fucking handle. This is a mission. I didn't think we were jumping this far ahead. So she turns around, and there's Jarl Broom with his wife. They were a remarkably handsome couple, tall and fine-boned. So he introduces Nina to his wife, and they rain so many compliments on her. First, apparently, she has like convinced this dude that she saved his life, so he's thanking her for that. They are impressed with what she has done with their daughter, and everything she manages to sort of deflect and be like, no, it wasn't me. And I like that eventually, even Jarl Broom is like, you really do need to learn to take a compliment. But it says, whatever suspicions Broom had held regarding Mila Janderstadt, they'd been cured by the fact that she had remained in Gavfall when the Zemeni couple and the Grisha prisoners had fled, which it never really occurred to me the effect that would have, that, you know, her remaining behind and them all disappearing would really make it look like she had nothing to do with it. And that is, like, it's such a sort of windfall for her cover story. It really has worked out well. So they had waited patiently at the convent while Broom had returned to the factory to see who had survived and put everything he could to rights, and, Nina suspected, to make sure there was no evidence of his failures. An industrial accident that had resulted in the deaths of valued captives was one thing, but a successful Grisha escape attempt after his humiliation at the ice court the previous year would have spelled disaster for his career. And it was very important to Nina that Jarl Broom did not lose his favored position. For the plan she had in mind, she would need every one of his connections and every bit of his access to highly placed bureaucrats, military commanders, and noblemen. I love this. Again, I'm forgetting how focused Nina is on the big picture. I keep thinking about, oh yeah, well, we're going to kill Jarl Broom because fuck that guy, he's evil, and he harmed her personally, and we just want him out of the picture. But she is just so much more level-headed than that. It's not, she's like, no, I definitely, don't get me wrong, I want the guy dead in the end, but right now, that's just not going to help me at all. And I have a very specific plan I'm putting into action here. So this is when Hannah shows up, and we find out how much she has worked with Nina. Nina had taught her to dress to suit her long, lean figure, taught her to stand with her shoulders back and walk with a lady's grace, and of course, Nina had taught her to act. As for Hannah's trust, she would find a way to earn it, and maybe even be worthy of it. Somehow. Hannah tells me she is at last prepared to put aside her foolish ways and find a husband. I do not know what magic you worked on her, but I am grateful. She is so much changed. She was perfect before, thought Nina, or would have been, if you hadn't pruned and plucked at her like an overeager gardener trying to mold an unruly shrub. Nina smiled. I think it was only a matter of time before Hannah discovered who she was truly meant to be. I am dying because honestly, this is like low-key what I want. I wanted Nina to have a partner in all of this. Nina working her magic the way that she does by imitating and acting is so much fun to watch. But it's always just her. You know, she's like the main person pulling this off, and she is surrounded by people a lot of the time who are like doing their best but just don't have the practice at it that she does. It's just not their like main skill. And I'm really excited at the idea that Hannah is going to be perhaps appear in this way. I don't know if Hannah will be as good, but it seems like the way that they're functioning together, I feel like I've got a lot to look forward to in the next book. And also the issue of like losing Hannah's trust. It's an interesting thing because Nina is talking about earning Hannah's trust back. And I'm like, well, you also have to worry a little bit, Nina, about creating a monster. If you have made Hannah learn how to act and behave, it is very possible that at one point or another, Hannah may be fooling you, and it will be because you taught her everything she knows. So, you know, I have no idea what that would even look like why Hannah would ever want to betray Nina. But it's just something that occurred to me was just that, you know, at this point, Nina is sort of taking it upon herself as if she is the only deceptive one out of the two of them. And Hannah is like the innocent. And at the moment, that seems to be true. But if she's bringing Hannah, leading her like by the hand down the same path that she traveled, it may not remain that way. So, let's see. I'm afraid a number of generals have come to discuss boring matters of war. Vadiv Demidov himself will be arriving in the capital soon. Nina hoped so. She intended to learn all she could about the Lantsov pretender and Fjerda's plans for battle. We will try not to put you ladies to sleep. We will be happy to talk amongst ourselves, Papa, said Hannah. There are new dress designs from Gedring to discuss. He smiled indulgently at her and took his wife's arm. As soon as his back was turned, Hannah winked at Nina, her gaze snapping fire. Shall we? She said. Nina slid her hand into Hannah's as they followed Ilva and Jarl Broom into dinner. They would build a new world together, but first they had to burn the old one down. I am very into the whole concept of burning down an old world and building a new one, and I am especially excited because this really just feels like we are full on in a relationship here, potentially, and the idea of this being done by a gay couple, I am just all about it. Let's do it. 100%. So, then we go to chapter 39, Zoya. Zoya had sensed the wrong... Ooh, excuse me. Oh, let me take a sip of water. So weird. Zoya had sensed the wrongness of the night even before she heard Tolia's shout. She felt it on the air, as if the crackle of lightning she controlled so easily now was everywhere, in everything. It had been that way since she'd claimed Juris' scales. He was with her all of his lives, all he had learned, the crimes he committed, the miracles he'd performed. His heart beat with her, the dragon's heart, and she could feel that rhythm linking her to everything. And power had been protection, the only defense she could grasp. Now it was something more. Everything was different now. Her vision seemed sharper, as if light limned each object. She could smell the green grass outside, wood smoke in the air, even the marble. She'd never realized marble had a scent. In this moment, running down these familiar halls toward the clamor in the conservatory, she didn't feel fear, only a sense of urgency to make some kind of order out of the trouble she knew she'd find. But, yes, she is not prepared for exactly how hard left things have gone. Tamar knelt beside a shoe girl with a dagger in her chest. Genya was crying. Tolia, David, and Nikolai, still dressed in his prisoner's shroud, stood around another body, a corpse that looked very much like the king. Everyone was shouting at once. And I love that Genya is like, how do we know that's really Zoya? And Zoya says, I once got drunk and insisted you make me blonde. Intriguing, said Nikolai. What were the results? She looked glorious, said Genya. Zoya plucked a bit of dust from her sleeve. I looked cheap. Genya dropped her hands. Stand down, it's her. So, this is the moment where they find out what happened. Nikolai saw it, so that helps. They ask whether or not the girl is dead, and Tamar says that the dagger struck too far to the right. And I really like later on, I think Nikolai says whether by luck or lack of commitment or follow through, something like that, just sort of like, well, she just couldn't do it. I have to wonder, I'm really curious because I don't know enough about my own anatomy to be certain where to plunge a knife to save my own life, but I'm also like not a warrior. That was kind of her whole deal. So it's certainly possible that she knows enough about anatomy to be able to do that. And maybe that was the point, was that they were going to have her be like almost killed because it was supposed to start a war, but she wasn't necessarily going to like die in this. That might have been part of the thing. I don't know. And Genya is talking about the fact that Isaac is the one who is actually dead. And Nikolai asks Genya if she can restore his features, like at least because they're going to have to bury this guy, and tell his parents. And what is his mother going to think trying to bury a kid that doesn't even look like her own son anymore, which truly that never occurred to me, but that is devastating. And Genya says it's harder without blood flow, but I will try. And I do like that idea that like tailoring a dead body is more difficult, and that makes sense. But the whole thing with the way that things went with Alina's body allegedly being burned, and then the Darkling's alleged body being burned, it's not impossible. So Genya says, why not just murder the king? Why try to kill herself too? And why would a princess sacrifice herself to do the job? And Nikolai is like, oh yeah, no, she's not a princess. Now, I am not certain if Nikolai can just sense what was being attempted here, or if he knows what the shoe princess looks like and recognizes that this isn't her. I don't know if it's explained how he puts the pieces together of what really happened here, but he seems to know right from the start what's going on. And let's see. What if Princess Aries' guards raise the alarm? They won't, said Zoya, not until they know their plan succeeded and the king is dead. Nikolai rose as if his wounds no longer pained him, as if the horrors of the last few days had never been, as if the demon inside him had been conquered after all. Then long live the king. Zoya and the others returned to the conservatory, and Nikolai was dragging along a terrified-looking shoe guard. She had a pinched, homely face, and wore the uniform of the Tavgarad, her long black hair tied into a top knot. And this girl is the princess. And it's such an odd moment because she's still trying to deny that's what's going on, even though Nikolai has clearly sussed the entire thing out. I love when she says, "Where's the princess?" And Nikolai's response is, "What a fascinating question." So, yeah, he says, essentially, I can tell that you are not a guard because I'm grabbing your arm and you are not defending yourself or doing anything like to stave me off. And the calluses on your fingers versus her hands do not match the way that you guys would be living your lives. You have fingertip calluses because you play that instrument that has 18 strings. That's like your signature, is the fact that you are really good at that. So they planted an assassin in place of the princess in order to get close to the king. But why would she try to kill herself off too? To place more suspicion on the Fjerdans? Asked Genya. Yes, said Nikolai, and to give the Shu a reason to go to war. Ravka's monarch dead, a member of the Shu royal family slain, the Shu would have every excuse they needed to march their armies into our leaderless country and use it as a base to launch an attack on Fjerda's southern border. So, okay, that answers my question from earlier, because I was like, would they try and team up? But the idea is no, they wouldn't have anybody to team up with. There would be nobody in Ravka, and they would just act like they had the right, and who would stop them? And Nikolai says, what was to become of you? And she says something about how they were going to send me to a farm upstate where I would be able to run in the fields and be really happy. And Nikolai is like, oh, sweetie, look, I don't want to be the one to tell you this, but that absolutely would never have fucking happened. He says, she says, I'm not a threat to my sister. I didn't want the crown. Think, Zoya snapped, losing patience. You are popular, adored, the daughter everyone wants on the throne. Your death is the thing meant to rally an entire nation to war. How could your sister let you live and risk discovery? You would be nothing but a liability. The princess lifted her pointed chin. I do not believe it. And I'm just like, I'm sure you don't, sweetie. But I bet you're going to find out. I bet you're going to see. Your guards have been secured, Zoya said. I suspect one of them had orders to make you disappear before you ever made it to your pastoral retreat. You can question them yourself. And she asks if she'll face trial or just be executed. And Nikolai is like, oh, no, that's not happening. You're going to bury me. And this moment, Zoya she's just like, fuck. She is aware that this is what she has demanded. She has been aware that all of this is the natural culmination of the events as they would have gone if they hadn't been sidelined in the fold. And yet, it's just painful to her that this is going to become a reality, and it's so sudden, you know? Our engagement will earn me a glorious dowry, and your popularity among your people will keep your sister from harassing our borders. And Ares says, I will not do it. And he's like, well, I mean, you can not do it, but then you will be executed. You won't be hanged, but the price is a life of luxury and my sparkling company. I love that. You could either be an awesome queen and hang out with me, or we can execute you. I love Zoya. You might consider the gallows, quicker and less painful. Until we announce the royal engagement, there's a good chance she'll try to bolt or kill herself. Keep a close eye on her. And they have the other girl who, I don't know if we ever find out her real name. Mayu? Is that the one? Let's see. Did the real Mayu ever mean to defect? Oh, that's right. I've forgotten about the other one that was like that they had gotten word about, and they were trying to like suss out which of the Shu guards was like the one sort of foundering and wanting to maybe betray their people. And yeah, if she was found out, maybe she used her own life to barter for her brother's freedom. Should make for an interesting chat once she's conscious. Okay, so they say that she is Mayu, right? That is her actual real name. They didn't just like pick a fake name for the princess to go by while she was pretending. I think that's what they're saying. Of course, they're just assuming that, but we'll just go with that. That's fine. So, this moment too. They're talking again about Isaac and the fact that he didn't hesitate. And Toya says he had the heart of a king. "What did you tell Hiram Schenk?" asked Genya. "His grin was as big as a melon rind. I gave him the plans for our submersibles. As I understand it, the apparat has gone missing and Fjerda is marching in support of a Lansov pretender." "Is he good-looking?" Tamar frowned. "The apparat? The Lansov pretender. I suppose it's of no matter. But, yes, I gave Schenk the real plans. We're going to war. We'll be in sore need of Kirch funds as well as our new shoe friends. I gave Schenk what he wanted, but he's going to discover it's not what he needs. Sometimes you have to feed the demon." And I thought maybe I was supposed to know what that meant, but that line is immediately followed with Genya just saying, "What does that mean?" And there's no response. So, all right, I'm as in the dark as Genya, and I can live with that. So then they start talking about the whole point of their trip out, about whether or not they found a cure for what has been going on with Nikolai. And then they have to make their big reveal. So his name was Yuri, and I'll call him that initially. Zoya tugged at the rope, and the monk stepped fully into the light. His hood fell back. Genya gasped, edging away, her hand flying to the patch that covered her lost eye. "No, it can't be. No." Nikolai placed a steadying hand on her shoulder. The monk was still too tall and too lean, but he moved with a new grace. His face was clean-shaven, and his glasses were gone. His hair looked darker, smoothed back from his brow, and the very shape of his features seemed to have altered, the bones winnowing to sharper, more elegant lines. His eyes flashed gray, the color of quartz. "Impossible. Improbable," said Nikolai gently. When Zoya had destroyed the vessel that Elizaveta had so lovingly preserved, she had seen a shadow leave the fire, but she hadn't understood what it meant at the time. The Darkling's power had fractured. Part of it had remained in the wounded shadow soldier that the ritual had almost destroyed, that still lived on in Nikolai. But the rest, the spirit that had begun to bleed from that soldier into the body Elizaveta had prepared, Zoya should have known the Darkling would not miss his chance at freedom. Yuri had gotten his wish. He'd helped his saint return. Had the young monk given himself up willingly? Joyously? Or in those final moments of fire and terror, had he begged to keep his life? Zoya knew there would be no mercy from the Starless Saint. The Darkling was not in the business of answering prayers. Yeah, that's an interesting question, and I'm very curious about whether or not there's anything of Yuri remaining in this body. If there's a struggle back and forth between the consciousness of the Darkling and Yuri, or if the Darkling is so strong that he overpowers what remains, perhaps, or maybe nothing remained, Oh, here it is. Nikolai had made the discovery in the shed where they'd taken shelter in the hours when Zoya had been trekking to Kribirsk. Okay, so they didn't see right away. Okay, cool. I did miss that line the first time. And she's like, "We could just kill him and bury the body here and nobody would know." And Nikolai is like, "If we kill him, this demon in me may never get out. We have to figure out a way to use him to fix this." And it's a weird moment because, to me, I understand vaguely what it is that Nikolai is thinking, but I personally would assume killing the Darkling properly would kill the demon. The reason that this demon has been alive is because it turns out the Darkling is not actually entirely dead. He was being preserved by a saint. So that to me is why this demon is still remaining. And if you get rid of him, the fragment of him living in Nikolai would die. But that's just my assumption. And I'm going to assume that's not actually how it is. And that, Nikolai isn't just dense and getting something very basic wrong. But yeah, it's a really weird situation to have him back after all this time, especially considering Alina doesn't have her ability anymore. So the person who had been able to stand up against him in the past is out of play. And thus, either we have to have somebody else who's got a weird ability like that, or it's not going to be relevant because he's under, like, arrest, essentially. He's being held. So maybe because he's not free to use his ability, it won't be as... But he's going to be free, right? Like, that's got to be, the next book has to be just, like, him somehow getting out and, like, rallying people again. Because, I mean, you know, I wouldn't be surprised if the Lantsov pretender suddenly, like, kicked the bucket and then all of a sudden there's the Darkling at the head of that army after all. So Nikolai insisted there was a way to use his power. Zoya wanted to watch him burn all over again, so she would wait. She could be patient. The beast inside her knew eternity. Now Zoya looked at Genya with her scarred hands pressed to her mouth, at Tolya's fury, at Tamar with her axes drawn. She looked at her king and the woman who would soon be his wife. We are the dragon, and we will bide our time. So many of my old friends gathered in one place, said the Darkling, from the mouth of a loyal, gullible boy, another fool who had loved him. It's good to be home. And that is the end of the book. So, yeah, I probably should have seen it coming. I probably should have. And look, I'm going to just say, you guys all know, I was not a huge fan of the original trilogy. And I found Alina a pretty frustrating character. So I am not wanting Alina to return to the equation. I would much prefer some other entire situation. Because, like, Alina has been taken so completely out of play insofar as she has been not even visited by any of our people in the midst of these. We know that that happened at the end of the trilogy when it's mentioned, but she isn't like, I just don't see her being suddenly pulled back into things in the second book. I think that likely it's going to be an extremely different, separate situation, but I truly don't know how, like, the ritual that Nikolai underwent that was going to be what saved him. Is that how the ritual would actually, like, I don't know how much of that was correct to what he would need to undergo in order to actually be rescued from this demon, and how much of that was just Elizaveta fucking doing what she needed to do for the Darkling only, and none of that was actually even relevant, or are they the same ritual? I don't know. But I am really curious about whether or not that piece that's inside Nikolai, he's so eager to get rid of it. And I can't help but wonder if getting rid of it would help the Darkling. If that's like a piece of the Darkling's power embedded in Nikolai, then that means that the Darkling that has come back isn't at full strength, I would think. I may be wrong about this. And for me, that feels like what you want. You don't want that guy having his full power back. That dude was way too much. And Nikolai isn't a Grisha. He doesn't even have any, you know? The only thing that makes sense here is Zoya being the one to go up against him, and her having the ability that she does now and the connection to everything that she does. She has this sort of deep link now to the heart of creation. And considering that everything about the Darkling is themed around destruction and death and darkness, I guess that makes more sense, to be honest, than Alina's just, oh, I have power, the power of the sun. I have light. Yeah, technically that's the opposite of dark, but it never really felt like there was a lot of life behind her ability. Alina just didn't... That series was just not as well thought out and written. You know, it just wasn't. So I kind of wonder if this is going to be Leigh Bardugo's sort of, like, attempt to have a more interesting battle. Something that feels a little bit more true to the elemental aspects of their abilities and the like life or death struggle between them, instead of it just being light and dark. And Zoya is just so much more compelling. So what I'm hoping is that Zoya manages to become queen somehow. I just think that she would be really good at it. There are some people who they are good with power and better with it as the sort of like right-hand person. They're not meant to be the figurehead. They are meant to be the behind-the-scenes mover and shaker, and somebody who gathers information and plays the chess while the leader does a lot of the like the public, more bombastic parts of the job. But Zoya is not like that to me. Zoya feels like she could very easily exercise power as queen and handle that well. And I just, obviously, there is a thing between her and Nikolai, and I just really do ship the two of them so hard. They are perfect for each other. And the question is, what do we do with this Shu princess? Because the Shu, by the end of this book, like that's where it ends, right there with "It's good to be home." We don't actually get to see the Shu's reaction to the discovery that their plan failed. And what will they do? Will they accede to the marriage in order to sort of like save face and be like, well, I guess this is better than, hopefully, I think what they are looking for is maybe in this way we can still organize a way to hit Fjerda from Ravka the way that we had planned, except we'll be doing it through this marriage. But I don't know. And I don't like this princess clearly doesn't want to be in this position. I don't know how much of a choice she has. Can she just bail and disappear? Like, what even would happen? And has the princess been tailored, and was her servant tailored? Or do they just look like were they just depending on the fact that nobody knew what they looked like to begin with? Because the whole thing with Isaac was that they had to fool everybody. They had to fool guards and servants and whatnot. I assume the Shu, because they're away from the palace, they don't need to do that because everybody's in on this plot. I'm just really curious what the Shu are going to do. And I want to see it. I hope that the next book starts like pretty quickly from where this one left off, and we get to like find out more about the overall reaction and the way that they're being leveraged, because there has to be more that they can get out of the Shu after this assassination attempt, especially considering that the girl who committed the murder is alive. So, they're going to be able to get information out of her. But yeah, so that was a really good and unexpected ending. Several twists in there that I did not see coming, and I probably should have, but I didn't. So I really enjoyed this one, and I'm really looking forward to starting the next one next week. So yay. All right, guys. Well, thank you again, Joanna, so much for commissioning this, and thank you to you all for listening. And I will be seeing you again very shortly with a new episode. Until then, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.